The mist hung low over the water like a gray blanket, broken only by the occasional ripple where a bass surfaced to snatch an unsuspecting insect. I'd been coming to this lake since I was 12 years old, when my grandfather first taught me how to tie a proper fishing knot on these very shores. Now, at 34, with calloused hands and a weathered tackle box that had seen more adventures than most people's entire lives, I still found the same peace in the pre-dawn silence that had captured my heart over 2 decades ago. My name is Marcus Chen, and I'm what you might call a creature of habit. Every Saturday morning at 5:30 a.m. sharp, I'd load my gear into the back of my old Ford pickup, the same truck I'd inherited from Grandpa, along with his love for fishing, and make the 20-minute drive from my modest home in Pine Ridge to what everyone in the area simply called the lake. It wasn't the biggest body of water in our county, maybe 8 acres at its widest point, but it was perfectly positioned in a natural bowl surrounded by towering oak and maple trees that had stood sentinel for generations. The lake held secrets in its depths that only a true fisherman could appreciate. I knew every underwater log, every drop-off, every hidden cove where the big ones liked to hide during the heat of midday. There was a particular spot on the eastern shore where an old fallen oak created a natural shelter that had produced more trophy bass than anywhere else I'd ever fished. That's where I was heading this particular morning, my breath visible in small puffs as I carried my gear down the familiar path. What made this morning different? What made it the morning that would change everything wasn't immediately apparent. The sun was beginning its slow climb over the tree line, painting the water in shades of gold and amber that would have made Ansel Adams weep with envy. A great blue heron stood motionless in the shallows, a living statue waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Tried and true popper that had never failed me in these waters when I heard the distant rumble of car engines, multiple car engines. My heart sank a little as I realized my peaceful morning was about to be interrupted. Don't get me wrong, I didn't mind sharing the lake with other anglers, but there was something about having the place entirely to yourself that made the experience transcendent. The rumbling grew closer, and I could make out at least 3 or 4 vehicles making their way down the gravel access road. That struck me as odd. In all my years fishing here, I'd rarely seen more than 1 or 2 other people at a time, and certainly never this early in the morning. The lake wasn't exactly a secret, but it wasn't well known either. It required a bit of local knowledge. To even find the access road hidden as it was behind a small grove of pine trees about a mile off the main highway, I decided to ignore the approaching vehicles and focus on my fishing. My first cast landed perfectly, the lure settling gently about 3 feet from the fallen oak. I began working it back with the practiced rhythm that had become second nature. Pause, pause. That big bass found irresistible. That's when I heard the car door slamming. Not just 1 or 2, but what sounded like a small army disembarking. Voices carried across the water, sharp and agitated, though I couldn't make out the words. I glanced over my shoulder and saw something that made my blood run cold. A group of about 8 people in business, casual attire standing at the top of the small hill that overlooked the lake, and they were pointing directly at me. The group appeared to be having some sort of heated discussion, with lots of gesturing and what looked like finger-pointing. One woman in a navy blue blazer had what appeared to be a clipboard, while a tall man in khakis and a polo shirt was holding what looked like official documents. The whole scene had an ominous bureaucratic feel that made my stomach churn. I tried to focus on my fishing, hoping they'd just observe whatever they needed to observe and leave me in peace. But deep down, I had a growing suspicion that their presence here wasn't coincidental. The way they kept pointing at me, the official-looking papers, the obvious tension in their body language, it all pointed to trouble. My suspicions were confirmed when I saw the woman with the clipboard pull out her phone and make a call. Even from my position 50 yards away, I could tell by her animated gestures and the way she kept looking in my direction that the call was about me. The knot in my stomach tightened as I realized I was probably about to have a very unpleasant morning. I reeled in my line and decided to pack up and leave before whatever was brewing could escalate. But as I started to gather my gear, I noticed something that stopped me cold. The tall man in khakis was now holding what appeared to be a surveyor's map, and he was using it to point out specific areas around the lake to the others. They weren't just looking at me, they were studying the entire property with the intensity of people who had a vested interest in it. That's when it hit me like a thunderbolt. These people thought they owned the lake. The realization was so absurd that I actually laughed out loud. I'd been fishing this lake for over 20 years. I knew every inch of it, every tree, every rock, every hidden inlet. More importantly, I knew who owned it. My grandfather had told me the story 100 times about how the lake had been created back in the 1940s when the county built a small dam to create a recreational fishing area. It was public land, managed by the State Fish and Wildlife Department, though admittedly not very well maintained or publicized. But as I watched the group's increasingly agitated discussion, I began to wonder if maybe there was something I didn't know. Had the ownership changed? Had the state sold the land to developers? The thought made my heart race with a mixture of anger and panic. This place wasn't just a fishing spot to MIT, was a connection to my grandfather, a sanctuary where I came to think and heal and remember what was truly important in life. The woman with the clipboard had finished her phone call and was now walking purposefully down the hill toward me, followed by the rest of the group. I could see the determination in her stride, the set of her shoulders, the way she clutched that clipboard like a weapon. This wasn't going to be a friendly conversation. "Excuse me," she called out when she was still about 20 yards away. "Sir, you need to leave this area immediately." I stood up slowly, my fishing rod still in my hand, and turned to face them. Up close, I could see they were all middle-aged suburbanites, the kind of people who attended city council meetings and served on volunteer committees. They had that particular look of righteous indignation that comes from believing you're defending your property rights. "I'm sorry," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and friendly. "Is there some kind of problem?" The woman, who appeared to be their leader, stepped forward. She was probably in her early 50s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of makeup that suggested she'd gotten up at 4 a.m. to look this put together. Her blazer was expensive, and she wore it like armor. "I'm Margaret Whitfield, president of the Lakeside Estates Homeowners Association," she announced with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "And you, sir, are trespassing on private property." I felt my eyebrows rise in surprise. "Lakeside Estates? I've never heard of that development. It's a new community," said the tall man in khakis, stepping up beside Margaret. "I'm Robert Henley, vice president of the HOA. We represent 47 families who have invested their life savings in homes around this lake. And we can't have unauthorized individuals using our private recreational facility." The word unauthorized hit me like a slap. I'd been fishing this lake since before these people had probably even heard of this county, and now they were treating me like some kind of criminal. I felt my face flush with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. "I think there's been some kind of mistake," I said, trying to maintain my composure. "This is public land. It's managed by the state. I've been fishing here for over 20 years. Margaret's expression hardened. "I'm afraid you're mistaken, sir. The Lakeside Estates development includes exclusive access to this lake for our residents only. We have the proper documentation to prove it." She held up a folder filled with what appeared to be legal documents. "These are the deeds and property assessments for our entire community. The lake and all surrounding land up to the tree line is private property belonging to the Lakeside Estates Homeowners Association." I looked around at the faces surrounding me, and I saw the absolute certainty of people who believed they were in the right. "Can I see those documents?" I asked. Margaret clutched the folder tighter. "I don't think that's necessary. What's necessary is for you to gather your things and leave immediately, before we're forced to call the authorities." The threat hung in the air like smoke. I felt my temper beginning to rise, but I forced myself to stay calm. These people were convinced they were right, and arguing with them in the heat of the moment wasn't going to accomplish anything except maybe getting me arrested. "Look," I said, "I don't want any trouble, but I've been coming here since I was a kid. My grandfather taught me to fish in these waters. If there's been some kind of change in ownership, I'd like to understand what H." The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching my mood as I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a legal pad covered in scribbled notes. Sleep had been elusive, my mind churning through the events of the previous day and the implications of what I'd discovered. The Lakeside Estates HOA might have been duped, but someone had done the duping, and I was determined to find out who. I'd spent the better part of Sunday evening online, diving deep into property records, business registrations, and news archives. What I'd found was a web of connections that painted a picture far more complex and disturbing than a simple case of overzealous homeowners. The key name that kept appearing was Henley, not just Robert Henley from the HOA, but a whole family of Henleys involved in various aspects of real estate development throughout the county. Robert's brother, David Henley, was a licensed real estate agent who had sold at least 12 of the homes in the area around the lake over the past 2 years. Their father, William Henley Sr., was a retired county commissioner who had served on the planning board for over a decade before stepping down just 6 months ago. But it was the fourth member of the family that made my blood run cold. William Henley Jr., who went by Bill, was currently serving as the chairman of the County Planning Commission, the very body that had denied Robert's petition to privatize the lake. I stared at my notes, trying to make sense of the family dynamics at play. Had Robert acted alone in trying to privatize the lake, or was this a coordinated family effort? Had Bill Henley recused himself from the vote on his brother's petition, or had he deliberately sabotaged it for some reason? And what role had their father played in all of this during his years on the planning board? My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed Jake's number. "Marcus, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday," Jake said without preamble. "There's something else you should know about that petition," Robert Henley filed. "What's that?" I did some more digging into the Planning Commission records. The petition wasn't just denied, it was denied unanimously, which is pretty unusual. Most of these things get at least 1 or 2 dissenting votes. But here's the really interesting part. Bill Henley, the chairman, not only didn't recuse himself from the vote, he actually led the charge against it. I felt a chill run down my spine. His own brother's petition, according to the meeting minutes, Bill gave a pretty passionate speech about the importance of preserving public access to natural resources. He even quoted some environmental law and cited precedents from other counties. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together in my mind, but the picture they formed was uglier than I'd expected. "Jake, I think I know what happened here. I think Bill Henley deliberately sabotaged his brother's petition because he knew it would fail anyway, and he wanted to look like the good guy while the family pursued other options. Other options like what? Like convincing homeowners they already owned the lake and hoping nobody would challenge them." There was a long pause on Jake's end. That's pretty devious, Marcus. You really think they'd orchestrate something that elaborate?" "I think the Henley family has been playing a long game with that lake for years, and I think yesterday's confrontation was just the tip of the iceberg." After I hung up with Jake, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to pay a visit to David Henley's real estate office and see what I could learn about how the homes around the lake had been marketed and sold. Henley & Associates Real Estate was located in a converted Victorian house on Main Street in the county seat, about 30 minutes from my home. The building had the kind of calculated charm that real estate agents love: freshly painted white clubboard siding, a wraparound porch with rocking chairs, and landscaping that looked like it belonged in a magazine. I parked across the street and studied the building for a few minutes, trying to figure out the best approach. I could simply walk in and ask direct questions about the lake properties, but that would tip them off that someone was investigating. Or I could pose as a potential buyer and see what kind of sales pitch they gave about lake access. I decided on a hybrid approach. I would present myself as someone considering a move to the area and ask general questions about available properties, steering the conversation toward the lake as naturally as possible. The front door chimed with an electronic melody as I entered the reception area. The interior maintained the Victorian theme with hardwood floors, period furniture, and walls covered with framed photographs of sold properties. A young woman with perfectly straightened hair and a practiced smile looked up from her computer. "Morning. Welcome to Henley & Associates. I'm Jessica. How can I help you today?" "Hi, I'm Marcus," I said, using my real first name but leaving off my last name for now. "I'm thinking about relocating to this area, and I was hoping to get some information about available properties." Jessica's smile brightened with the intensity of someone who smelled a potential commission. "Wonderful, you've come to the right place. We specialize in finding people their perfect homes in this beautiful county. What type of property are you looking for?" "Well, I'm an avid fisherman," I said, which was certainly true. So I'm particularly interested in homes with water access. I heard there might be some properties around a lake somewhere in the area. Oh, you're in luck. Jessica practically bounced in her chair. We have several beautiful homes in our Lakeside Estates community. It's an exclusive development with private lake access for residents only. Let me get you some information. She rummaged through a filing cabinet and pulled out a glossy brochure that made my heart skip a beat. The cover featured a stunning photograph of my lake at sunset, with the words Lakeside Estates, your private paradise, emblazoned across the top in elegant script. I flipped through the brochure, fighting to keep my expression neutral as I read marketing copy that made my blood boil. Escape to your own private retreat at Lakeside Estates, where tranquil waters and exclusive amenities await. Our carefully planned community offers residents the rare privilege of private lake access, ensuring peace and privacy for your family's recreational activities. Fish, boat, or simply relax by the water's edge, knowing that your private lake will never be crowded with outsiders. The brochure included a map of the area that clearly marked the lake as private lake residents only, and featured testimonials from satisfied homeowners praising the exclusive nature of their community. This looks beautiful. Say the private lake access is really appealing. How does that work exactly? Jessica leaned forward conspiratorially. It's one of our most popular features. The entire lake is owned by the Homeowners Association, so it's exclusively for residents and their guests. No random people showing up to fish or swim or make noise. It's like having your own private country club right in your backyard. I felt my face flush with anger, but I forced myself to maintain my interested buyer persona. That's amazing. How long has the community been established? About 2 years now, Jessica said proudly. We've sold over 40 homes, and there are still a few prime lots available. The demand has been incredible, especially from people who appreciate the value of private recreational amenities. I can imagine. What's the price range for homes with lake access? Jessica's eyes lit up with dollar signs. Our lakefront properties start at around $450,000, which is an incredible value considering the exclusive amenities. Comparable homes without lake access in the area typically sell for around $300,000. So you're really only paying about $150,000 for private lake access that would cost millions to develop from scratch. The math was staggering. If they'd sold 40 homes at an average premium of $150,000 for fake lake access, that represented $6 million in fraudulent sales based on a lie about owning public land. That does sound like a great value, I said, my voice carefully neutral. Is there any chance I could drive by the lake and take a look at it? Maybe see some of the available properties? Absolutely, Jessica said, reaching for her keys. I'd be happy to give you a tour right now if you have time. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in the passenger seat of Jessica's spotless BMW, fighting a surreal sense of déjà vu as we turned down the familiar gravel road toward the lake. But this time, instead of heading to my usual fishing spot, Jessica drove to a different area on the north side of the lake where several large homes had been built among the trees. This is our newest section, she said as we parked in front of a massive 2-story house with a 3-car garage and professionally landscaped yard. The Petersons bought this one last month. They're retired from Chicago, and they absolutely love having their own private lake for fishing and kayaking. I looked out at the water, the place where I'd scattered my grandfather's ashes, and felt a surge of rage so intense it nearly overwhelmed me. These people had built their dream homes based on a lie, and they'd paid a premium for the privilege of excluding people like me from public land. The privacy aspect is really important to these buyers. Jessica continued, apparently interpreting my silence as impressed contemplation. Mr. Peterson told me just last week how much he appreciates not having to deal with random fishermen or teenagers swimming in his lake. Random fishermen, the phrase hit me like a cell. The threatening note changed everything. What had been a quest for truth had now become something far more dangerous. And I realized I was no longer just fighting for access to a fishing spot. I was potentially risking my safety to expose a conspiracy that reached deeper than I'd ever imagined. I called Sarah immediately, my hands still shaking as I held the note. She arrived at my house within 30 minutes, bringing with her a photographer who documented the slashed tires and the threatening message. But it was what Sarah told me next that made my blood run cold. "Marcus, I've been digging deeper into the Henley family connections, and what I found is going to blow this story wide open," she said, her voice tense with excitement and concern. William Henley Sr. didn't just serve on the Planning Commission. He was instrumental in creating the legal framework that his sons are now exploiting. She pulled out a thick folder of documents. 3 years ago, Sr. sponsored a county ordinance that was supposedly designed to clarify water rights and recreational access for mixed-use developments. The ordinance created a loophole that allows homeowners associations to claim exclusive access to adjacent water bodies if they can demonstrate historical community usage and provide adequate legal documentation. I stared at the papers, trying to understand the implications. So he created a legal pathway for his sons to steal the lake. Worse than that, the ordinance was written so vaguely that it could potentially be used to privatize dozens of other public water access points throughout the county. "The lake where you fish isn't their end," amidst their pilot project. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. The Henley family hadn't just targeted one lake. They'd engineered a legal mechanism that could be used to systematically steal public water access throughout the entire county. Every fishing hole, every swimming spot, every canoe launch that had been enjoyed by generations of families could potentially be claimed by developers using the framework William Henley Sr. had created. "There's more," Sarah continued. "I found records showing that the family has already begun the process of claiming to other lakes in neighboring counties. They're using the same playbook: buy up surrounding property, create a homeowners association, post private property signs, and intimidate people away from public land until they can establish historical community usage." I felt sick to my stomach. How many families have they defrauded? Based on what I can document so far, at least 80 families across 3 counties with fraudulent sales totaling over $15 million. But that's just what I can prove. There could be dozens more. The threatening note suddenly took on a new significance. The Henley family wasn't just trying to silence one troublesome fisherman. They were protecting a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise that could potentially generate hundreds of millions in fraudulent real estate sales if it wasn't stopped. "Sarah, we need to go to the FBI with this," I said. "This is way beyond local corruption. This is organized crime." But Sarah's expression was grim. "I tried reaching out to federal authorities yesterday. The problem is that the Henley family's political connections run deeper than we thought. William Jr. Billison, just the Planning Commission chairman, his wife is the district attorney's chief of staff. His sister is married to a federal judge, and Senior's old law partner is now the county sheriff. The web of corruption was so extensive that I couldn't see how we could possibly get justice through official channels. Every agency that should have been investigating the Henley family was potentially compromised by their connections. "So what do we do?" I asked. Sarah's eyes hardened with determination. "We do what journalists do best. We expose them so completely and so publicly that their political connections can't save them. But first, we needed more evidence. The recordings and documents we had were damning, but they weren't enough to bring down a conspiracy this large and this well-connected. We needed proof of the broader scheme, documentation of the other properties they'd targeted, and evidence of the political manipulation that had made it all possible." That's when Sarah proposed something that made my heart race with equal parts excitement and terror. "Marcus, I have a contact who works for the county clerk's office, not Jake, someone else who's been watching the Henley family for years. She's been building her own case file, but she's been afraid to come forward because of their political connections. With the evidence we've gathered, she might be willing to share what she knows." The contact turned out to be Linda Rodriguez, a 20-year veteran of the county clerk's office who had watched with growing alarm as the Henley family systematically manipulated public records to support their fraudulent claims. We met her at a diner 40 miles outside the county, in a booth at the back where we could speak without being overheard. Linda was a small woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and the kind of quiet intensity that comes from years of watching injustice. From the inside, she slid a manila envelope across the table to Sarah with hands that trembled slightly. "I've been waiting for someone like you to come forward," she said quietly. "I've been documenting their activities for 2 years, but I couldn't do anything without corroborating evidence from outside sources. The envelope contained photocopies of internal memos, email printouts, and handwritten notes that painted a picture of corruption so systematic it was breathtaking. The Henley family had been using their political connections to manipulate public records, alter property descriptions, and create false documentation to support their claims of ownership over public land. But it was the last document in the envelope that made my hands shake as I read it, a detailed plan titled Phase 2 Expansion that outlined the family's strategy for claiming ownership of 17 additional lakes and streams. Throughout a 3-county area, they're not just stealing one lake, Linda said, her voice barely above a whisper. They're planning to privatize every significant body of water in this part of the state. The potential profits are in the hundreds of millions. I looked at the list of targeted water bodies and felt my heart break. These weren't just anonymous lakes and streams. They were places where families had been fishing and swimming and making memories for generations. Places where children learned to cast their first lines and where grandparents passed down stories and traditions. The Henley family was planning to fence off and monetize the natural heritage of entire communities. Linda, Sarah said carefully, would you be willing to go on the record with this information? Linda's face went pale. I don't know. These people have destroyed careers for less. They have connections everywhere, and they're not afraid to use them. But if we don't stop them now, I said, how many more families will they defraud? How many more public spaces will they steal? Linda stared at the documents spread across the table, and I could see the internal struggle playing out on her face. Finally, she nodded slowly. If you can guarantee my safety and my job, I'll testify to whatever authorities will listen. That night, Sarah and I worked until dawn, organizing the evidence into a comprehensive expose that we hoped would be impossible to ignore or suppress. We had recordings of David Henley making false claims about lake ownership, documents showing the political manipulation of public records, evidence of fraudulent real estate sales totaling millions of dollars, and a detailed plan for expanding the conspiracy across multiple counties. But as we prepared to go public with our story, we discovered that the Henley family had been preparing their own counterstrike. I was awakened at 6 a.m. by pounding on my front door. Through the peephole, I could see 2 men in expensive suits, flanked by what appeared to be private security guards. One of the men was holding a briefcase and legal documents. I opened the door cautiously, keeping the chain lock engaged. Can I help you, Mr. Chen? I'm attorney Bradley Morrison, representing the Henley family and Lakeside Estates homeowners association, the taller man said in a voice that dripped with practiced authority. We need to discuss your recent activities that have caused significant distress to our clients. I'm sorry, but I don't think we have anything to discuss. Morrison held up a thick legal document. I'm afraid we do, sir. This is a cease and desist order demanding that you stop trespassing on private property, stop harassing residents of Lakeside Estates, and stop making false and defamatory statements about our clients' legitimate business activities. The audacity was stunning. After everything I'd uncovered about their criminal conspiracy, they were still trying to intimidate me with legal threats based on their false claims of ownership. Mr. Morrison, I said, I think you should know that I've been working with investigative journalists and have documented extensive evidence of fraud and corruption related to your clients' activities. Morrison's expression didn't change, but I caught a flicker of something uncertainty in his eyes. Mr. Chen, I would strongly advise you to be very careful about making unfounded accusations against prominent members of this community. My clients have significant resources and are prepared to protect their reputations and business interests through all available legal means, including threatening people and vandalizing their property. Now Morrison looked genuinely confused. Sorry, what are you referring to? His confusion seemed genuine, which suggested that